Today's guest is Dr. Gurney, a leading psychologist and sex expert dedicated to reshaping our understanding of intimate satisfaction and compatibility. With a refreshing approach that highlights the power of mutual authenticity, she shares her insights on how real, lasting connection can transform our relationships. In this conversation, we dived into redefining what sex means.
If we think of sex as something as expansive, it really creates all kinds of freedom. If you ask somebody, did they have sex with someone, they might say, oh, we did everything but.
Yes.
But you didn't. You had sex.
That's true, yes. We explored the illusion of the perfect sexual partner.
There is no such thing as being good in bed. It's an absolute myth, because sex isn't a skill like, I don't know, playing the violin, that if you practice it enough, you'll become very accomplished at.
And we broke down the concept of the orgasm gap and why it exists.
Sex needs to be enjoyable for us to feel motivated to do it. Orgasms are one of those ways that we enjoy it. If you go on long enough without pleasure and orgasms, it's a bit like every time you go to work, you don't get paid or you don't get any other job satisfaction. You're just going to stop wanting to go to work.
Before we get into it, just wanted to mention something interesting that we've noticed recently. About 92% of the people watching these videos aren't subscribed yet. Now, no pressure at all, but if you're enjoying the content, subscribing is a super simple way to stay connected with us, and it also helps us out a ton when growing the channel. It's free, just takes a second, and it's hugely helpful. Either way, I appreciate you being here. So thanks for watching, and let's get into it. This is a question that seems so simple, but yet I don't think I know the answer.
Go ahead.
What is sex?
What is sex? Sex is something we can do alone or with somebody else or with more than one person, with our body or mind, to give or receive erotic pleasure.
Okay.
So that's as wide a definition as you can get to. That's my definition of sex. Everyone's got their own. But really, if we think of sex as something as expansive as that, it really creates all kinds of freedom with how we can start to think about our sex lives. We can enjoy our sex lives alone, solo sex, masturbation. We can enjoy sex lives with another person entirely digitally. We can enjoy our sex lives where we're using our mind more than our bodies in terms of the things that we might say to somebody to try and turn them on. So sex is as expansive as that.
Well, it's interesting because the way that you describe it is there are no rules to it. Because I think oftentimes what we hear, especially in heterosexual sex, is sex means penetrative, which is penis in vagina.
That's right.
But that is absolutely not a rule whatsoever.
No, I mean, it's certainly a social rule. It's a social script that we have, particularly in today's society, particularly when men and women have sex together. We have an idea that that's what sex is. And it's important to note that that idea about sex comes from historical contexts of sex being about procreation only, sex being linked to having babies, to the church, to something that you do within marriage out of duty. Quite different ideas than we might have now about what we have sex for, what the reasons are behind it. If you ask somebody, did they have sex with someone, they might say, oh, we did everything but.
Yes.
But you didn't. You had sex.
That's true, yes.
And we have words like foreplay. We have words like virginity. These are words I do not use ever. Both of these words pedestal penis and vagina sex as the main act of sex, and they relegate all those other wonderful forms of sex as being just the starter, in the lead up to the main course. Which is so interesting when you think about it, because even if you take the word virginity, and the phrase I use is sexual debut.
Sexual debut.
Which basically is, there's no one fixed time point, from even when we're very young, our sexuality is emerging in terms of our attraction to others, our sense of ourselves, our self-exploration. There's no one fixed point where we become sexual beings. We emerge into that. And if you think about a phrase like sexual debut, we're really talking about privileging the incidences on that timeline that are important to the individual. When was the first time you had an orgasm? When was the first time you truly felt able to let yourself go with somebody else? When was the first time you felt joy during sex? When was the first time that you experienced this one type of sex that you discovered is your favourite thing? Which is very different than the word virginity, which says this is the marker of when you became a sexual person. And this one type of sex that you may not even like anyway, or, this may not have been that pleasant for you, is the start of your sexual career.
Wow.
What a crazy idea.
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard you talk about foreplay, and I want to talk about that. And it wasn't until you brought that up that I thought, wow, you're right, foreplay, bad word. But you're right in terms of virginity. That makes sense, because it's this continuum in essence that we're on.
Yeah.
But I've seen that pop culture is beginning to embrace this. Let's keep unpacking it. All right, so we're still in what is sex. So we had a guest who came on and she said, I am demisexual. And I didn't know what it was at the time, and I had to do my research. And I saw this scale, this asexual to allosexual scale. So what is that scale? And are we all somewhere on that scale?
Yeah, so we're all on a continuum with all kinds of things in life, aren't we? And our sexuality is no different. So we're on scales with sexual orientation. It's fairly rare for people to be entirely straight or entirely gay. There's a lot of people somewhere in the middle. And it's the same with our relationship with our sexuality. For some people, sex is really important and integral to their sense of well-being. We meet some people in life, don't we, who are creative people.
Yes.
And we're like, gosh, you're really creative. I don't know if I'm as creative as you. I can enjoy creativity and I can have a good go at it. But actually, it doesn't feature as strongly in my life as it does yours. And that's the same with sex. For some people, sex is a central feature and something that they become really quite distressed or unhappy if it isn't going to plan. For other people, it matters much, much less, to the point where maybe it doesn't really matter at all.
Interesting.
And we know from sex research that sexual satisfaction, on average, is very important to relationship satisfaction. So we can say that sex is important for relationships. But of course, there are lots of people in that pool of people for whom it doesn't matter that much too. What matters then is that the person or people they're having sex with also feel the same way about sex, that it doesn't matter too much to them either.
Is that what sexual compatibility actually is? Or is there no such thing as sexual compatibility?
Well, sexual compatibility is a really interesting thing because there's no one definition of what that could mean, physical attraction. There might be things like how much you place sex as something important in your relationship. There might be things to do with what kinds of sex you want to have or how often, although those things do fluctuate a lot through the course of our life, and I'm sure we'll come on to that later on.
If you're dating, because this is a question that I often hear, is that, you're dating, you're trying to figure out, is this a partner that you want to have in your life in a committed way? Is there a way to determine how sexually compatible you are early in the relationship?
Yes.
There is.
Talk about it.
Oh my goodness.
How important is sex to you? What have your experiences been of sex so far? What kinds of things do you want out of a future sexual relationship? Isn't it bizarre that we ask people questions about, do you want to have kids? Where do you want to live one day? How important is exercise to you? How important is your family? These are questions we ask people, right, to establish whether we've got shared values.
That's true.
Why don't we ask about sex? Because sex is the one thing that if you're in a monogamous relationship, you can only get from that person. All the other things, desire to travel or interest in horror films, you could meet those needs elsewhere. Sex is actually quite important if it's something you want to feature in your relationship. So it'd be good to ask, but of course it's difficult to ask.
Yes, and also I would imagine that a lot of the answers are lies.
It's a good point.
Do you like, I love sex. I have sex every night,
And actually, it could also be that your relationship that you're about to have might be the one that changes people's experience of sex forever in a positive way. So you might ask that question when you're dating and they might say, so far I can kind of take it or leave it. I like sex, but it's not the most important thing to me. And it might be that your relationship is the vehicle to take their sex life to a new level. So it'd be good not to discount people on the grounds that, where they're at right now, because for all of us, our sexuality is in constant flux throughout the course of our life.
On that note of compatibility, right? So let's say you have the conversation. What I often hear is, as well as, okay, so we slept together and it was fabulous. What is fabulous sex? Like, what is actually good sex versus bad sex?
It tends to be that people feel that they've been able to lose themselves in the moment. So for that, however long it's gone on for, nothing else mattered. And they were completely present with that person in the moment. That's usually a great definition of sex being good. Sometimes people will evaluate sex based on things like number of orgasms. That's fine if that's how you want to do it. But, orgasms are not the be all and end all of good sex. They matter. But it might be that orgasms are easier to come by, perhaps at the start of a relationship when there's lots of novelty, lots of newness, lots of difference, high attraction, high arousal, high mystery. And that might become more challenging over time. So good sex is really about being able to completely let yourself go with another person.
So it's bad sex that you were focused the entire time. I need to do this.
Yeah.
It was very technical.
Yes.
Okay.
Really bad sex is sex where you felt you didn't want to be there and you struggled to end the encounter. And that's sometimes connected to all kinds of ideas in society that are unhelpful about things like you shouldn't lead someone on and then halfway through decide that you're not into it. This is a really unhelpful and actually painful idea for a lot of people because they find themselves, people of all genders, find themselves going along with sex that they don't want to be having. And that's going to lead to bad sex. Sex where you're not present, sex that's not pleasurable, sex that doesn't make you feel good afterwards. Those would be definitions of bad sex. Sex that's not good but is mediocre sex is often the type of sex where you're distracted the whole time. Being distracted during sex is actually really common for all of us. Something like 92% of people have non-sexual thoughts during sex. Did I turn the cooker off? What time is it? Have I missed match of the day?
Yeah, exactly. My team is playing in 5 minutes.
Exactly. Those thoughts are really common, really normal, nothing to worry about. But the opposite of being completely absorbed in the moment, which is this great sex we've talked about, is having a running commentary going through your head of all of the things you're thinking about or worrying about. So this could be things like, I've got to be up in 5 hours, we need to wrap this up soon. It could be things like, they're not enjoying themselves. What if I don't come? What if I can't stay hard? What do they think of my body? Those kind of sex-related worries are things that really affect people's experience of sex, and they are so, so common. They're much more common than being lost in the moment.
Wow. What if you are experiencing those thoughts, second thoughts, concerns, but you're there for your partner, and your partner is they're losing themselves in the moment. Is then that still a bad sexual experience because two people didn't mutually experience that euphoria?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd both want to be lost in the moment, but you're never going to be at the same level with that because, we've all had different days. We're all in different headspaces all of the time. But you're right, you probably don't want a huge mismatch there. It would be unusual, I think, for one person to have completely lost themselves in the moment and not be tuned in to the fact that their partner isn't. It would take a particular kind of person to not really be concerned that their partner seems distracted. But we all become quite good at masking our distraction. We know what noises to make, we know what faces to pull, and we perform sex to fool our partners sometimes into thinking that we are present and there. It's also okay to think about this as a continuum, and it's quite common for people when they're dating or whether in new sexual relationships to not be able to lose themselves in the moment with that new partner. There's lots that's maybe good about it. It's highly erotic, it's new, it's got the mystery. You're really attracted to that person. Mm-hmm. You've not got any of the other context of, the pets and the kids and the house and the mortgage to desexualize your relationship. So there's lots that's good about that. But actually, in the start of a sexual relationship, we know that people often struggle to really let themselves go because they're worried about how the other person is evaluating them. So it's okay to go through peaks and troughs with this.
That brings up this topic around safety. Mm-hmm. And is there any gender difference around feeling safe with a partner? Mm-hmm. And then how does that impact casual sex that you're talking about? Because oftentimes I've heard that in a lot of casual sex encounters, mm-hmm. that the pleasure rate is very low, in
yes.
particular for women.
It is.
And I've heard that it's also associated with lack of safety, but maybe I'm off there.
I think it is really important to think about the risk of sexual violence, particularly for women having sex with men. Of course, we know there are higher rates of sexual violence. And that is something which, of course, affects sense of safety, which then affects ability to be in the moment. Essential. But there's probably more to it than that with the orgasm gap in casual sexual encounters. So, of course, we know the orgasm gap is the different rates of orgasm when you have sex on your own, so masturbation, versus with a partner of a different gender. And we see particular trends in the orgasm gap. The biggest orgasm gap is when cis women have sex with cis men. So in heterosexual sex, we see a very large orgasm gap. The rates of orgasming alone for all genders is about 95%. But as soon as you have sex with another partner, if you're a woman, it drops unless you're having sex with a female partner. Okay. So women having sex with regular male partners can expect their orgasm rate to drop from 95% to about 65%, whereas men's doesn't drop. And then with casual sex, it can drop down to as little as 8%, different stats.
As little as 8%?
8%, 12%, 18%, different research produces different stats. Huge orgasm gap.
Yes.
Our social scripts magnify casual sexual encounters. Let me explain what I mean by that. We have these ideas of what sex looks like. We talked about it earlier. Sex is a penis and a vagina. Sex ends when men come. Women's orgasms are trickier than men's. None of these things are true, but these are ideas we hold in society. It's important for both people to orgasm is another idea that we hold in society. So when men and women particularly have sex together, we know that the sex that they have usually falls down to penis and vagina sex. And in casual sex, you see even less variation than you might see in more committed relationships. Because, it might be just happening once.
Sure.
And so people might skip other types of sex. They might, do the set route, the baseball analogy, we do this, then this, then this, then we have penetrative sex. But we know that the penetrative sex bit is the type of sex that is least likely to result in pleasure and orgasm for women.
Okay.
So if you look at all the different types of sex that might produce pleasure and orgasm, and you ask people of different genders to rate them, men will rate penetrative sex up there at the top with masturbation as the most reliable to produce orgasm, and women will rate it at the bottom. Underneath masturbation, a partner touching the clitoris with their hands or fingers and receiving oral sex, and penetrative sex is after that.
Okay.
So we know that only about 20% of women can orgasm that way. And even then, it's kind of indirect stimulation of the clitoris. So when the sex gets boiled down to that being the main course and very little around it,
it makes sense.
Anatomically, it's just quite unlikely that women will orgasm. But it's not just about the orgasm gap. It's also about whose pleasure is prioritized. It's about women being socialized not to be too assertive sexually, not to feel able to ask for what they need, not to be able to say, hey, you know what, this is great, but I also need a vibrator if you want me to come.
Yes.
Women don't feel able to say that in casual sex. And so what happens is we have really high rates of faking orgasms. About 55 to 65% of women fake orgasms regularly.
Wow. In relationships?
In relationships and in casual sex.
Wow.
And when we fake orgasms, what that does is create an illusion that actually women are orgasming in that type of sex, which then makes the next woman who comes along and says, actually, this isn't going to do it for me. Her partner says, well, that's not like all the other women I've had sex with. you must be unusual. So people don't say, and it kind of maintains this orgasm gap over time. So it's complex. It's not anatomical. That's the key message. There is no difference in the time taken to orgasm by gender alone.
Okay.
So women's orgasms aren't trickier. They don't take longer. They take the same number of minutes that men's orgasms do. But if the women watching or listening reflect on how they produce orgasms alone, it looks quite different to this idea of what sex is in our society. It's very different. The clitoris is quite far away. When we stop using words like foreplay, virginity, and saying we did everything but to talk about sex, we're also giving an idea that we think sex is so much more than one particular sexual act, which allows the freedom to say, hey, you know what? I'd really like to have sex, but the sex I'd like to have is oral sex.
Yes.
Or the sex I'd like you to have is you using your hands on me. It's almost impossible for people to say that to each other, A, because we can't talk about sex, and B, because people feel they're abnormal.
There was a woman who had written in, and she was in a relationship, she's in a marriage, 16 years. She said she's had 4 orgasms in 16 years. The 4 came at the very beginning of the relationship. She uses sex toys, but she fakes the orgasm with her husband countless. I mean, it's endless faking. You know, it's what I think about that is I think, gosh, you can't have the conversation with your husband. But I understand it must be incredibly shameful. Is it? I mean, what is preventing that conversation from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I see this in therapy. This is not an unusual situation. I see this in therapy. It's common. And it isn't just about having orgasms. It's about all kinds of things. I don't like the way they kiss. I don't like the way they initiate sex. It leaves me cold. I don't like the direction our sex life is going in. And also not just from women, from people of all genders. So, but this issue around orgasms is one that crops up a lot. It's partly driven by a sense of not feeling normal. So that's one of the key factors. If you think about what you see on television, you see women orgasming from a few thrusts of vaginal penetration at the same time as men orgasm. That's what you see. That's what we've all had represented to us. I can't tell you the number of women that I've spoken to about this fact of anatomy, the fact that, you know, the clitoris and the penis are actually the same structure. You know, they developed in the womb and they went different directions. So having sex without your clitoris being involved is the equivalent for a man of having sex without your penis being involved. And it's our culture that's created an idea that it's okay to just forget that and do something quite different. But it's women that struggle to then think that they're not abnormal. So that sense of being abnormal is one of the things that keeps people quiet. There's also the maintaining of the status quo. How do I tell someone after decades that I've been lying about my orgasm all of this time? But it also does those partners a huge disservice because you're not communicating with them. What that might do, and in fact what it does do, I see this all the time, is it impacts people's desire. Because sex needs to be enjoyable for us to feel motivated to do it. And orgasms are one of those ways that we enjoy it. So if you go on long enough without pleasure and orgasms, it's a bit like every time you go to work, you don't get paid or you don't get any other job satisfaction. You're just going to stop wanting to go to work.
Right.
So that's something that then as a couple, you're contributing to that loss of desire, loss of sexual satisfaction for you both over time. I'm not saying it's easy. This conversation is not easy if you've been faking it for a long time. But it's part of a cultural shift, I think, that we can start to talk about, hey, I've never been able to talk about this because I always thought it was me. And for us to have a great sex life moving forward, I really want that to change. And that's a tough conversation, but it's a necessary one.
Yes, I can't imagine how challenging that conversation would be, being in a relationship. But even if you are not yet in a full-blown relationship, it sounds like what you're advocating is stop faking orgasms.
Yes.
There's no circumstance whatsoever where you should fake an orgasm.
Yeah, I would love us all to normalize being able to talk about sex. We have this idea that sex is, I don't know, it's like some kind of water slide where, you get on at the top and then you can't get off until you've splashed at the pool at the end, right? And people feel that pressure, whether that's to go, in inverted commas, all the way to penetrative sex, or whether that's everybody needs to orgasm for it to have been a good time.
Right.
Let's normalize saying, you know what, we fooled around a bit, and that's all I wanted tonight, and that was wonderful. Thanks so much. Let's go to sleep.
Yes, and I would imagine, too, that self-esteem and self-worth has to creep into this a little bit, because we had a guest who, my gosh, I think she had numerous partners, numerous sexual partners, faked orgasms with all of them in an attempt to keep them in her life.
Yes. So people want to be good sexual partners, don't they? They want to be good in bed. There is no such thing as being good in bed. It's an absolute myth. None of us can be good in bed, because sex isn't a skill like, I don't know, playing the violin, that if you practice it enough, you'll become very accomplished at. It's not a skill. It's about being able to talk, listen, understand, share, accept growth. And so we can never be good at that. We can only ever have the intention to do those things. But people have an idea that they want to be good in bed, they want to be a good sexual partner, and because of that, there's all kinds of things that they do to achieve that, whether that's feeling that they need to perform in bed, feeling that their bodies need to look a certain way, feeling that their body hair has to be a certain way, feeling that they have to orgasm, so they'll fake it just so that their partner feels good about the sexual encounter. It's all linked to this idea of being good in bed, which, it's interesting, it was largely popularized, that idea, by the kind of really the advent of the kind of latter half of the last century in psychology, when we talked about learning and skill. And we started to see that replicated in the magazines that we consume. If you think about the, I don't know, lads mags from or the mags aimed at women as well, from like the 90s and noughties. It's all about, how to be good in bed, missing the point entirely.
Yes.
Of what sex is and what good sex is. It's not possible to give the perfect blowjob. Somebody else's version of oral sex will be different to the person that you were last with in terms of what they like and don't like.
Yeah.
So all you can do is ask, what do you like and not like?
Yeah. Many people feel abnormal about their sexual experiences because of unrealistic portrayals in media, where women are shown having an orgasm from simple penetration alone. In reality, anatomy shows us that the clitoris is essential to female pleasure, just as the penis is for men. Ignoring this leads many women to hide their true experiences, which affects both desire and satisfaction in relationships. Open, honest communication about needs in intimacy can help break this cultural norm, allowing couples to redefine pleasure without pressure. Let's normalize discussing what feels good without the expectation of reaching a specific goal every time. So now, is this a myth or not? Right? I think this could be either, you're going to destroy a lot of lives right here when you say this. I don't know what you're going to say. Is penis size at all important?
No, it's not at all important.
At all?
Okay, right, let's deconstruct this. It's not important at all.
At all.
So there are a couple of anatomical reasons it's not important, which is that if we're thinking about, and I'm going to privilege vaginal penetration here because usually that's what people worry about with penis size. I don't want to ignore the idea that people have anal penetration, because they absolutely do, but they usually don't want something massive in there if they're going to. But vaginal penetration is where people are usually talking about the importance of penis size. So let's go with that.
Okay.
The majority of nerve endings are around the opening. Okay, so it doesn't actually...
Of the vagina?
Yes.
Okay.
And the anus, actually, if we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
So actually, if you're thinking anatomically, it doesn't matter for that reason, because most people's pleasure comes from that part, that kind of lower third, bottom part of the vagina. So if you're going to have a sensation that you enjoy, it's going to be from that. But remember, anatomically, that's not what it's all about anyway for most people.
Right.
And even if you did want something larger inside there, there's all kinds of things you can use and should use because novelty and diversity is important in sex. So you don't just have to use the tools you've got, right? You can use your hands, you can use sex toys, you can use all kinds of things to create different sensations. But that's the anatomical part. The key thing, though, here is that we think that sex is something that we do with our bodies, and therefore our bodies respond to something like penis size. But actually, sex is something we do with our brains. And the amount of arousal that we're feeling is turned up or turned down in our brain by the nature of what's happening between us. So you could be having sex with somebody with a very large penis, but you're not attracted to them, you don't feel connected to them, there's nothing erotic about the experience, they don't know anything else about how your body works, they've not asked you what kind of pleasure you want. That's not going to feel good. Your brain is going to turn down that. You're not going to feel as much physically.
Okay.
Or you could be having sex with somebody who you feel really connected with. It's really erotic. It's really fun. The dynamic between you is a dynamic you want, whether that's sensual, aggressive, romantic, whatever it is. It does it for you. When we're in that kind of scenario, our brain turns up what we can feel. And everyone will have had experiences of not being able to feel much in their bodies. And everyone will have had experiences of the slightest touch setting us on fire. Penis size is absolutely irrelevant because what's happening for us sexually is not just about the physical sensations that are produced from something touching something else. That touch that I feel there is being mediated by my brain. And I'll feel a different touch if you touched my hand and I was like, oh, I'm happy for Paul to touch my hand. Or if someone I didn't like touched my hand, it would all feel different.
All right, so I'm Jamaican. Mm-hmm. And all the time it's like, all right, Jamaican, you must have. And this is a joke. It's a joke, but then there's this, it's not a joke as well.
It's not, yeah.
But why are we so obsessed with penis size?
Why are we so obsessed with penis size? I mean, I guess it's, there's lots of things about body image and the sexualization of body image that we're obsessed with. Also like breast size or waist to hip ratio or, there's quite a lot of things like that, muscle mass, that we idealize and pinnacle. And maybe it also comes from an idea that because sex used to be seen as just about penetration, and we didn't know then what we know now from sex science about what really makes a difference to sexual experience, i.e. it's not just about the body and anatomy, but it's about the whole experience. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why. But it does upset me a lot, actually. Like, penis-sized jokes do really upset me because I see the impact of those jokes on the men that come and see me that are desperately worried about the size of their penis and see it as something that really matters. Maybe they're even avoiding sex and relationships, which is, when you think about what we've just spoken about, is I don't know, it's just so sad. And, stereotypes based on race as well. I think, I'm glad you raised that because I think that's another thing that, people make jokes about these things, as you say, but there's a lot of over-sexualization of certain people, certain groups based on these ideas, ideas of certain groups of people being more submissive because of the colour of skin, certain numbers of people having more sexual prowess. And it's all racism, actually, kind of tied up within the sexual realm. And it means that people then go into their sexual encounter sometimes being fetishized.
Yes, but Karen, I have a question. Mm-hmm. So what about the G-spot?
Yes, okay. The pelvic area is rich in nerves and sensation, and there's lots and lots of parts of the pelvic area for people with all body shapes that produce erotic sensation. So although we might say that the main pleasure centers are located within the glands, so that's the glands of the penis and the glands of the clitoris.
Okay.
There are lots of other parts of the body that also produce pleasure. So we have the prostate, for people who have a prostate, people assigned male at birth. So, and that might be really pleasurable if you receive anal penetration from someone. And it's important to say that lots of men who identify as straight enjoy, and they should absolutely enjoy, the pleasure that comes from having the prostate stimulated. Okay. It's not about sexuality.
Yeah.
You know, that's there. That pleasure-giving part is there. It's not connected to sexuality at all.
Yeah. All right. And we are going to go fully there.
The G-spot, as it's used to be called, it's now, there's a very long scientific name for it, which is like clitoroureal complex. It's a very long
That's
and
not sexy.
less sexy name. Essentially, what it means is an area on the front wall of the vagina, maybe a half to 2/3 up, where the clitoris, which I don't know if you've seen a picture of it, it's like a wishbone.
Yes.
Yeah. So where the clitoris branches out, that bit runs past there. So basically what you're going to get is the clitoris is a very large structure under the skin. It's, around about 5 to 7 centimeters in length. And you can't see most of it. Most of it is hidden in the pelvic area. When we become turned on, the clitoris fills with blood just like the penis and becomes erect. When it's erect, sometimes internal stimulation can stimulate it indirectly.
Okay.
So we believe that that's probably what people used to talk about when they talked about the G-spot. And the people that do have orgasms from vaginal penetration, it may well be that it's that part of the body. It's still the clitoris, just indirectly getting stimulated.
Okay, but you said you said half an inch to it's so penis, once again, nothing. It seems as if and maybe because we're more openly talking about sex, perhaps there's a rise of fetishes now. Are you feeling that or not necessarily?
I haven't seen that backed up in any research, but I think you're right. I think it's probably that we're talking more about the things that we're into. Porn in itself is not inherently harmful, but mainstream porn can be misogynistic and problematic and all kinds of things. But one of the things that mainstream porn, I think, has brought into today's sexual conversation is that there are quite a lot of niches. And I think people maybe find their niches in a way that they maybe didn't find them before, when all you could get was like a magazine in the shop at the end of the road,
right,
that had some, pictures of people in it. It didn't have, people that were into this and this and this. And one of the things that our brains do around sex is they search for novelty. And so we might find ourselves looking into quite niche things and then discover, actually, that's something that I'm quite into. And that's probably what it's about. A change in the conversation.
So is pornography good or bad?
It's a bit like saying, is social media good or bad? It depends. It depends on what you're consuming. It depends on your relationship with it. It depends on how it makes you feel. Pornography, in some way, shape or form, has been around as long as humans have. So it's not new. We know that we were looking at explicit images and creating explicit images, as long as we've been humans. So it's very much part of what we're interested in.
Can I ask, what was the first explicit image? It was like Carmen on a stone.
It was a cave painting, but I'm not sure I could say when the first one is. But even if you look at kind of ancient Egypt, if you look at other parts of the world, you'll find representations of what we might call pornography.
Wow.
And you'll see that in all cultures all over the world. So it's very much part of what humans do and are interested in. I would say that there is a bit of a cultural panic about pornography, and there are quite a lot of misconceptions about it being addictive, and it's not addictive. There are certainly people who find themselves watching more pornography than they would like to, or only feeling comfortable with pornography and not feeling comfortable with a real life partner, but that's not the same as something being addictive. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It meets a need. It's easier. It has less anxiety attached to it. You don't have to communicate what you want. You can go straight to the thing that you want without having to navigate that with somebody else.
Right.
That's a lot easier. We're going to talk about communication later, I'm sure. And it's harmful if it's your only way of learning about sex. So there's a lot of panic about young people learning about what sex is through pornography. And there absolutely should be, because it's not real sex. and it doesn't show a great depiction if you're accessing free mainstream pornography. And of course, there are other types of pornography that are more ethically produced and show much more diversity, consent, respect, and are still hot and sexy. But if that's what you're accessing to learn about what sex is, that's a problem. But that's not a problem with pornography. That's a problem with poor sex education. Because it's like, and this isn't my quote, and I'm sorry that I can't remember whose idea this was, but the quote that, you don't learn to drive from watching Fast and Furious, and you shouldn't learn to have sex by watching pornography. Can you imagine if we sat teenagers down and showed them a car chase film and said, "This is driving"? So it's not pornography; it's everything that surrounds it. And there's some fascinating research about, the people that feel more out of control with pornography are the people who feel the most shame about pornography. They're not the people watching it more. If people come to a clinic like mine and say, I feel addicted to porn, it's often because they feel shame and guilt around porn, not that they're consuming it more than the person next to them.
I often hear people debate if pornography is good or bad, and so I appreciate Karen's expert answer. She makes it clear that the pros or cons of pornography depend on how you engage with it. Explicit content has been part of human history, reflecting our curiosity. But problems arise when people, especially young people, use porn as their only source of sex education. Mainstream porn often doesn't depict realistic or respectful relationships. The key is better sex education to set healthy, realistic expectations for real-life connections. Sex today versus sex when our grandparents were having it.
Okay.
I always feel as if we're having more sex today. That's how it feels. You're looking around, you're watching television, right? It feels like we're having more sex today. But I'm completely wrong, aren't I?
Yes. We're having less sex now than we did a decade ago or the decade before that. We don't have the data going back before that, but we might guess it was similar. And that's data that holds up all around the world. So we're having less sex than we were before. We don't exactly know the reasons for that because obviously, we can't look into every variable. But the suspicion that we have, and I feel this quite strongly, is that it's about the lives that we lead now. So we're much more distracted, we're much busier. We spend a lot more time interacting with technology, something like 8 or 9 hours a day. A typical person in the UK is spending time looking at a screen or a device, which if you think about it is drastically different from in our grandparents' day. We pick up our phone every 12 minutes. So we probably give our phone more eye contact than we give our partners. It's probably linked to this, and I should just say this quickly, to ideas about how desire works, because we often have an idea in our society that desire is present as a drive, like hunger or thirst, and therefore we should just feel like sex. But it's probably important for people to know that desire is something that emerges out of a certain set of contexts. And those contexts might be feeling connected to a partner, physical contact with a partner, feeling relaxed and content with ourselves, perhaps having time on our hands. And technology stops us doing all of those things. So in terms of amount of sex, it's declined. Whether we could say that the quality of sex has declined, we don't know. I would hazard a guess that the quality of sex has improved and that people, don't get me wrong, we've got a long way to go so far. The orgasm gap is testament to that. But I would say that the expectation of sex being something that should bring pleasure, that people should feel consent as part of the process, that people should feel agency and autonomy and should have freedom to have the sex that they want with whoever they want, that's very different to our grandparents' day, and long may that continue. But Paul, we've got such a long way to go.
Oh my God. So just on the orgasm note too, and frequency of sexes, so you're suggesting that the orgasm gap has actually decreased. So do you think it was worse?
Oh, that's a great question that I don't have data for, but I would guess so, yes.
Great God, what could it have been?
That's only speculation because we don't have any. Well, we do have a bit of data actually from the kind of 50s era. Kinsey and Masters and Johnson era, but not as rigorous as the data we have now, so you can't compare it directly. But I would guess that people are having better sex now. And it could be one of the hypotheses about why we're having less sex now than we did 30 years ago is that we're more able to say no. And particularly women are more able to say no. And of course, that's a good thing. So it could be that the drop in the sex that we're having is a good move, a good turn in events in terms of the social milieu. But we don't know.
We don't know. Wow.
We don't know where we'll be in 30 years' time.
30 years.
We might only be having sex with robots.
I think this is where we're going.
I think it's possible because you don't need to do the advanced communication with robots.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it all the time with regard to AI being embedded into dating apps.
Yes.
And chatbots and the propensity of people to fall in love with a chatbot now.
Absolutely.
And to your point of if 95% of, and I know sex is not about an orgasm, but if you can get an orgasm 95% of the time masturbating or with a tool,
yes,
then why do you need anyone else?
Why would you have another person?
Why would you have another person?
I mean, absolutely. I really think that we will see a shift towards people's sex lives becoming more digital and connected to AI more than they are now. And I think for many people, that might be a really good and positive move for them. And I think we're not going to know what it does for the majority of people until it's already happened. I think, even now in my clinic, I see a difference in generations of younger generations feeling sometimes less confident to approach partners, to navigate what they want sexually, to be able to have the communication that they might need in a sexual encounter. And maybe in decades before, there wouldn't have been an option to automate that. Just get what you need from porn, get what you need from a chatbot. But now there is. And so in some ways, there's less incentive to kind of push through that and challenge yourself, I suppose, to develop those skills.
Yes.
And I don't want to put a value judgment on it because people should be able to do whatever they want with their sex lives. And if you enjoy sex with a robot and are happy with solo sex, that could be perfectly right for you. But it's just a really interesting cultural change.
It is. And to your point is how as a society do we adapt to that change? I need to come clean and tell you about the love affair I've been having these last 2 years. But before you start thinking that I'm disloyal, don't worry, my wife knows everything. Because even Jill can't ignore how truly, madly, deeply in love I am with the new show sponsor, Huel. Hand on my heart, I carry up to 3 Huels with me every day. Some might even call me a hardcore Huel drinker. And they'd be right, I am. My days start early, so drinking my ready-to-drink Black Edition Vanilla is such a convenient way for me to fuel my body with great nutrition. But the part I love most is Huel is a complete meal packed with 35 grams of protein plus 26 vitamins and minerals to help me thrive. So whether I'm traveling, on set, or recording, I know Huel will keep me feeling good. If you're tempted to have a love affair of your own, visit Huel.com and use code Paul for 15% off your next order. That's HUEL.com. It's the eternal struggle most of us face, building a fulfilling, successful career, but also being an available partner, parent, and friend. It never lets up and sometimes compounds to an overwhelming feeling of being stretched too thin. But there are ways to ease the load, and today I want to introduce you to one of them, who is also a sponsor of this podcast. Fiverr is the marketplace where you'll find thousands of highly skilled freelancers ready to take on your business needs. From graphic design to digital marketing, Fiverr is your one-stop shop. Here, you can browse talent portfolios until you find one whose work and skills and budget aligns with yours. What's even better is Fiverr's new AI tool, Neo, which streamlines the process of matching talent and briefing them in. Free up some of your time in life. Head to Fiverr.com, that's Fiverr.com, or click the link in the description and use code PAUL, that's PAUL, at checkout for 10% off your first order. You were the first person that I heard talk about this, and I went and did some research around it, and it has blown my mind, is the Kinsey scale.
Yes.
So could you describe what this scale is? And then I'll give my opinion as to why it blows my mind to this day.
So probably before Alfred Kinsey, who for people that don't know was a kind of real pivotal sex researcher in the States in the kind of 40s, 50s era. And Kinsey was the first person to take, I suppose, the study of science and apply it to sex. So before that, people had talked about sex. People like Freud were talking about sex, but they were talking about it from a kind of psychoanalytic framework. So not necessarily based in science and experiments, but based in theories and hypotheses. But Kinsey was the first person to say, well, let's look at it scientifically. Let's survey what people do. And there were lots of things that Kinsey found out that were mind-blowing to the scientists of the time. One of them was people's definitions of their own sexuality, because I suppose at that time there was an idea that people were either straight or gay.
Yes.
And very little thought to whether there may be any fluidity within that. So black and white, straight or gay. And what Kinsey found through his research was that actually it was more likely that the majority of people sat somewhere in the middle. If you think about a bell-shaped curve, with small amounts of people being on either end and a majority of people sitting somewhere in the middle. And that was mind-blowing to America at the time. And in fact, very sadly, Kinsey had his funding pulled.
Really?
Because it wasn't just about the Kinsey scale, there were other things as well, but he was so, his work was so advanced at the time that it was seen to be damaging to the values, the family values of America. It explains things like, for example, there are many women in relationships with men that are quite happy in their relationships with men and enjoying sex with men, but exclusively fantasize about sex with other women.
Yes.
And vice versa with men as well. What's interesting about sexuality is that it is a spectrum, but because we have an idea in society that heterosexuality is normal and best, which of course it isn't, but that idea is very strong, people will usually pick a part of the scale that's more socially acceptable.
Exactly.
And so there may be a lot of people out there who might sometimes get turned on by the thought of sex with someone with the same body parts to them. If we were all free to explore our sexuality without that dominant cultural narrative, we would probably see much more variation than we do now.
Right. And this is why, to me, this is incredibly sad. How many people identify as straight?
Oh, in the population?
In the population.
Oh, like 90%.
Yeah, 90-something percent. So you have one huge, group right here at one end. And unfortunately, they're not accepting their true identity.
Yeah.
Right. And so you think about the psychological consequence.
And the sexual consequence as well, right? So those people, they might be able to have sex with the partner that they're with, and that's, not abhorrent to them. But actually there could be a whole other set of sexual experiences out there that may give them more sexual satisfaction, more pleasure, more desire, that they're closing their mind to. And that's shifting, which is great. I think, there's a long way to go, but I think people are much more comfortable. And certainly in younger generations, we see this, which is wonderful. Younger generations are much more fluid in their definitions of their sexuality and much less invested in an idea that they have to be straight.
Yes, yes. So we've talked a lot already about how to have sex, but now I want to unpack how to have sex.
Okay.
Right, the Karen Gurney guide of how to have sex.
There's no guide, that's the point.
That's right. There's no rules. But I feel as
canvas.
if one part of the canvas, though, is you talk about sexual currency. You've already alluded to this. This is part of the communication. So can you describe sexual currency? Because it's interesting. As I started looking at this, I thought to myself, how strong is the currency that my wife and I have? And I looked and I thought, I don't know how strong our currency is. So what is sexual currency, and why is it so important?
So my definition of sexual currency, and it's a term I came up with in my first book, Mind the Gap, is about the sexual charge between you and your sexual partner. not acts of sex, so not what's happening when you're having sex, which, let's be honest, is a very small amount of time in your month or year, isn't it, if you think about it? The actual having sex bit, no matter what sexual act it is, it's a very small amount of time. Is that our sex life, that tiny amount of time? No, it's not. Our sex life is always happening. It's not an on-off switch. We've not got a sexual relationship with our partner and then we have sex and we're having a sexual relationship. We've always got a sexual relationship with our partner, and that's the sexual currency. How much charge is between us? So what you'll see when you watch a couple who are newly together are very high levels of sexual currency. So what this means is all of the things that they're doing that they wouldn't do with a friend or relative. Eye gazing, flirting, sexual compliments, bum grabs, sex texts, sending pictures, suggestive comments, talking about what they want to do. All of those things are sexual currency. Passionate kissing, really important one.
Okay.
And we see really high levels of sexual currency at the start of a relationship. Then sexual currency tends to decline as we fall into other less sexual ways of relating. And it's not a coincidence that levels of spontaneous desire often fall at that same time as well. Because what sexual currency does is it provides us with a context to spark desire. Mm-hmm. So if we have a passionate kiss for the sake of a passionate kiss, we might not have felt arousal or desire before the kiss. But sometimes, if the stars are aligned and the circumstances are right and we're not too distracted and the kids aren't screaming, that might well trigger desire. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So what happens the longer that we're with someone, and I see this all the time in therapy, is that sexual currency starts to diminish, perhaps to the point of zero. Mm. So we've got months and months of nothing. It's, have you had a nice day? Peck on the cheek. Have you put the bins out? Such and such has got the maths homework due in tomorrow. And that's it. And then all of a sudden, this couple wants to transition into having sex. How do they do it? What do they do without sexual currency?
Yeah.
What do? They either have to come straight out with it and say, do you want to have sex? Which will feel very dramatically different to how they've related for the last couple of weeks or couple of months. And it will feel awkward and it will feel jarring and they'll feel like they don't know where to start. So sexual currency is something that is about the culture of our relationship. We can change cultures because we do it all the time, right? And I gave an example in my latest book, How Not to Let Having Kids Ruin Your Sex Life, that it's just like when we all started to recycle. Like at first it was really awkward and we were like, what goes where? And I keep putting things in the wrong bin. I keep forgetting to do it. But now we've created a culture shift just by doing it regularly. And we now recycle automatically. So we can have sexual currency feature as much or as little as we want in our relationship, even if we're past those first heady 18 months, just by being intentional that this is a culture we want to invest in and create. And, I was listening to your episode with the Gottmans recently, who are, wonderful. I reference them in my books. And they talk about the 6-second kiss.
Yes.
So great example of sexual currency, building in a practice of we will have a 6-second kiss and we will be absorbed in each other in that moment. It's not about initiating sex. It's about marking each other out as you're my sexual partner. I'm attracted to you. I see you in this way. I want to have this relationship with you. The more sexual currency we have, the easier it is to transition into sex because you've got high levels of sexual relating. These are the couples who I see in the therapy room. They can go from putting the online shop away to kissing passionately against the fridge. Mm. That's easy for them because they do it regularly. It's not awkward. It's not weird. It's what they do. Versus the couple I mentioned earlier who don't have any sexual currency, and then they want to get sex going, but how do they do that? Because as soon as they reach to their partner and touch them or kiss them in a way that they haven't done for the last 4 months,
right,
their partner goes, what are you doing?
Right.
I know what you want, and I'm not feeling desire right now because this is all totally out the blue, and I don't feel that way about you because we just don't relate that way. And it becomes really high stakes. And when sex becomes high stakes, it becomes high pressure. And pressure is an absolute desire killer.
Okay, this makes sense. So I think I had misunderstood. So sexual currency, in almost in essence, is how emotionally close you are.
Sexually close. I would even go so far as to say sexually close. You know, it's the things you wouldn't do with your child. You think about your child. You know, you'll kiss them, you'll hug them on the sofa, you'll be physically affectionate. This is the stuff that you would only do with a sexual partner. It's saying. I give an example in my book of a couple that they're at their NCT group, and he gets a text, and he looks at his phone, and she's mid-conversation with someone else the other side of the room, and she looks up at him, and it says, "You are by far the hottest man in the room," with a flame emoji. That's sexual currency.
Yes.
He feels desired by her. They've got that secret between them. It's the kind of thing you would do at the beginning.
Yes.
It doesn't take a long time. It doesn't need to fade in a long-term relationship.
Karen, you have to give us what are some top ways to create sexual currency?
Okay.
I mean, the text, that's hot.
Yeah, the text saying, you know, people love to hear they look nice, right? Oh, you look really nice in that top today, but they want to hear that they look hot.
Yes.
That's what they want to hear. If we don't, we all need that. We all want to feel desired. If we don't get that in our relationship, sometimes we're vulnerable to getting that elsewhere. So we want to think about, what do we want to feel and how can we provide that? So it's the text, it's you look hot, it's sending them a song on your phone and saying, do you remember the night we had to this song? Or when I hear this song, I think about when we did X. It's passionate kissing. Passionate kissing is one of the biggest things. It often drops off in a long-term relationship unless it's part of sex.
Okay.
If you're watching or listening now and you only passionately kiss, either to initiate sex or during sex, change that up.
Yes.
Make it, be intentional, say to your partner, I was listening to this podcast, you know, we need to talk with Paul Brunson, it's amazing, you should listen to it. And they were saying that passionate kissing is a gateway drug to desire.
It's a gateway drug.
Yeah, that's my new favorite
desire.
phrase.
I love that. Sexual currency is a concept that's new to me. It's what Dr. Gurney says is the ongoing charge between you and your partner, not just during sex, but in everyday interactions. It's what keeps passion alive in a relationship, from flirty texts to a lingering eye contact and passionate kisses. Over time, couples often lose this spark, yet it's easily rekindled with intentional acts like the Gottman 6-second kiss or a quick text to remind your partner they're still the hottest one in the room. Small gestures build desire and connection, making sexual currency a powerful habit to invest in for long-term intimacy. And I would also imagine that creating an alluring invitation to sex means making sure that anything that could destroy sex goes away, like your chihuahua that keeps jumping on the bed.
Yes. I think we might have talked about this before, you and I, but I discovered this not from sex research, which is where I get most of my information, but from my Instagram followers. When I was talking with them, I did a poll on what gets in the way of their sex lives. An incredible number of people said pets in the bedroom. And then I did a series of posts on it and I discovered it's a thing. I don't have any pets, right? So I didn't know about this. And the research doesn't talk about it either. Maybe I'll do some research on it. But it turns out that a lot of people are distracted or put off by their pet in the corner of the room, whether they want to come in or out, whether they're watching, whether they're trying to get involved, all of that.
I can attest to this.
So you've got a pet?
I have. See this little one right there? Where is he? He's in this little photo. He's a Chihuahua.
Oh, cute.
Super small.
What's he called?
His name is Peter Gabriel.
Peter Gabriel.
Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel. So Peter Gabriel lives with my wife and I. Like literally wherever we go, he's with us. He jumps in the bed, and he's not just on top of the cover. He's under the covers.
He's in, yeah.
And he will not go to anyone else.
No.
But us.
It's a problem.
It's a massive problem. He's sitting there. He's staring at us.
And pets are a bit like children, aren't they? For all of us, you know, people that have got pets, they're like another member of the family. They're like a child. You don't really want them watching, getting involved.
This is terrible, but I have picked him up and I brought him to the bathroom. Yeah. I said, all right, look, Peter Gabriel, here's your walk. Here, I'm going to close the door.
Here's a bone.
You stay here. And then you know what you hear?
Yeah, which is distracting.
Scratching at the door. It's terrible.
Remember we talked earlier about good sex as being in the moment. anything that pulls us out of the moment, and that could be hearing the pet scratching, thinking you've heard one of the kids get up, thinking about work the next day. Those are all things that pull us out of the moment. So the more we can do to reduce those distractions, the better for our sexual response. So that means arousal, desire, the way our body works, orgasms, all of those things are better when we are absorbed in the moment.
Okay. You know what, Karen, never get a pet.
I won't.
Never get a pet.
We actually have a hamster called Taco, but Taco obviously isn't in a cage in a completely different part of the house, so it's fine.
So it's fine. I heard you once say that the best thing for our sex life is a good night's sleep.
It's a great thing for our sex life, yeah. I mean, there are so many things that are good for our sex life. Talking about sex, getting a good night's sleep, feeling good about our bodies, emotional intimacy in our relationship if we're having sex with someone we know well, being aware of the types of things that work for us sexually and being able to communicate that to a partner, particularly if they're a new one. But yes, sleep is important.
Sure. So how often should we be having sex?
The $1,000,000 question, that, isn't it?
Yes.
And people are obsessed with the amount of sex that they should be having. I would like to, before we talk about numbers, to just say that sex science tells us that the frequency of sex is completely irrelevant to sexual satisfaction. So what that means is that there is no relationship between frequency and good sex.
Okay.
Or a good sex life. That's really important because in our society, we're so hung up on frequency as the yardstick of a good sex life that you'll hear people talk about that. They'll say, oh, we have sex this many times a month. They don't tell you whether they have great sex, life-affirming sex, sex that they lose themselves in, sex that's high in pleasure and reward. They don't tell you that. They're just telling you how often they could be having the worst sex, where they're distracted.
Night, the worst sex.
Yeah, where Peter Gabriel's walking in, all of that. So frequency is a total red herring, but I think it is still useful to talk about numbers because although there is huge variation in the amount of sex that people have, and although it doesn't mean anything because quantity and quality are completely different things, I find that people are very hung up on a number, and it's usually a number that's much higher than what we know to be the average. So when I ask people in therapy, how often do you feel like you should be having sex? Because everyone always comes because they want more sex. People sometimes come because they want less, but it's not as common. People usually, it's the number one reason people come to sex therapy, because they think they should be having more sex. And I'll ask them, how much sex do you think you should be having? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. It's always the same. Maybe 3 times a week. They'll always say that. 3 times a week. No idea where that's come from. It's some kind of like societal myth. I don't know, 3 is the magic number. I don't know. But they'll always say that. And that's not what they want. That's just what they think they should be doing.
Sure.
It's fine if they want to have sex 3 times a week, but usually it's, this is what I should be doing. This is what's normal that's driving that. What we actually know from large-scale sex research, and we have the biggest sex census actually happens in the UK, that happens anywhere in the world, and it's called NatSal, and it happens every 10 years. And what we know from NatSal data is that actually it's more like a bit less than once a week is the average. If you're in the kind of 35 to 45-year-old age category, it's much more likely to be about twice a month.
Wow.
And that there are a third of people under the age of, mid-40s who haven't had any sex at all in the last month. So it's also quite normal to not be having much sex at all. And I find that this is often quite reassuring to people who've got an idea that they're not having sex enough. But I would say take those numbers really with a pinch of salt, because if you're having sex 3 times a month, which we're saying is the average in the UK for people of all ages, and that sex that you're having isn't good sex, that's actually worse for your sex life than having sex once a year that's great sex. So really just forget about numbers. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
But when you say having sex once a year that's great is better than having sex 3 times a month that's
absolutely
bad, I think that's startling to a lot of people.
Sex once a year that blows your socks off is a better sex life than sex 3 times a month, it's average. Because remember, our sex life is not an on-off switch that's defined by those minutes when we're having sex. It might be that this person who's having sex once a year has got a whole year characterized by lots and lots of sexual currency, and they feel very connected as a sexual couple. But in terms of acts of sex, they don't do that often because they don't need it, because they feel sexually connected without it.
Right, because they have that. And I think also what we get caught up in is not only frequency, but also duration.
Yeah, duration, yeah.
This seems to be a massive thing.
Yeah, it's so strange, isn't it?
Is how long? So it's. I would imagine that duration is insignificant to you.
Yeah, and it's insignificant, although it's quite interesting. I wrote about this in the How to Not Let Having Kids Ruin Your Sex Life book, because I talk about quickies as a potential strategy if you're time poor. But I say, be aware of the quickie if one person's pleasure is going to be sacrificed for another's.
Interesting. So you're advocating for the quickie in certain...
The quickie can be great if you're time poor.
Okay.
Because a lot of people get into an idea that, sex has got to last a certain amount of time. A quickie can be great, and of course it doesn't have to be penetrative sex, something sexual. But it's what we know is that when women and men have sex together, sometimes the quicker it is, the less likely she is to experience pleasure. So a quickie is good if you can privilege both people's pleasure, but if you can't, then a quickie is actually bad. But some really interesting stats actually about the average length of time that people spend having sex. And a fascinating fact is that women who have sex with women have sex sessions that last between 50 minutes and an hour. And women who have sex with men have sex sessions that last about 18 minutes. So it's actually 3 times as long. So some of the advice that I give to the lesbian couples that I work with is it doesn't need to go on for days. Let's just speed it up a bit.
Because what I'm calculating is that's the average. 50 minutes is the average.
It's the average.
So you're talking about 2-3 hours.
Yeah.
Some people are going.
And then, people come to therapy and they say, we don't feel we're having sex enough. I'm like, yeah, but the sex you're having is lasting 3 times as long. You just can't, you can't compare. But it's about what works for individuals. And for some people, they love to lose themselves in a long sex session. For other people, that's prohibitive because they haven't got the time. And so it might be finding ways to speed things up a little bit. Make it one-sided.
Yes.
Make it just about one person's pleasure and orgasm. It doesn't have to be touched to both people's body. Use sex toys. Sex toys are great to speed it up because they often work to give people the stimulation that they need. And that makes it more achievable to fit in. So, yeah, sometimes if you've got time restrictions, particularly for parents, you've got to think outside the box for how can we make this work for us and still make it time efficient.
Right. I love it. All right. So a big topic for many people in a relationship is how do they keep the flame going, right? And in particular is what are things that couples can do to increase that intimacy? Now, sexual currency clearly is one. The invitation, I've got the invitation down. I want to report. Please. I'm going to report back to you on the invitation. What are some other things that we can do to increase it, especially if it's reached a place where we're no longer having any sex with our partner?
Yeah. I think one of the things we need to do is understand what the flame is. What do we mean by the flame? And I alluded to this earlier, but we know that the longer we're with someone, the more realistic it is that we won't experience out of the blue desire. So that if we're talking about the flame being feeling like sex out of the blue, people need to first know that it's normal for that to decrease the longer we're together.
Okay. And is the technical term spontaneous desire?
Spontaneous desire, yeah. Which basically means, you're just feeling like having sex out of the blue. You have it a lot at the start of a relationship and then it diminishes. We know that it diminishes so much, particularly for women, but not exclusively women, for lots of men too. And if you're thinking of that as desire and the only way of experiencing desire, you're going to be waiting a long time to feel like sex. It's useful for people to know then that the flame is also something that you can nurture. And you can nurture it and experience what we call responsive desire. It's no different than spontaneous desire. It's just like stoking the fire.
Okay.
Instead of the fire spontaneously setting itself alight. we can stoke this fire and create responsive desire within ourselves by thinking about sex, engaging with sex, reading, listening to erotic literature, connecting with our sexuality alone. So that will often trigger desire. Good sex scenes on TV, erotic literature, erotic audio, porn. These are all things that kickstart desire for us. And if people aren't convinced, they need to experiment with that on their own. What happens if you do that? Do you notice desire? And people probably will. But we can also nurture that as a partnership. So we can nurture that by sexual currency. Sexual currency is basically stoking the fire.
Okay.
But we can also think about what else in our couple relationship supports or diminishes our interest in sex. And sometimes it's about relationship dynamics. So it might be about too much or too little intimacy. So for some couples, they need some separation. They need to see each other from a distance. I don't know if you're familiar with Esther Perel's work, but she writes really eloquently about the idea of what happens when we see our partners from afar.
Yes.
And for some couples, that's exactly what they need. For others, actually, it's about creating distance. They're almost too intimate. There's no separation. There's no mystery. There's nothing that they don't know about each other. And so that might be an emotional intervention that they might bring in. And then there are some really interesting things as well that have emerged out of sex research that you would never expect. I know, just really interesting things that we know support a good sex life that on the surface seem nothing to do with sex. So one of them is conscientiousness, which is possibly one of the most unsexy personality.
Even saying it.
Conscientiousness, basically, it's obviously one of the big 5 personality traits. And sex researchers found that conscientiousness, people that are conscientious tend to have good sex lives. So that's people that like to plan, like to think in advance, like to kind of look at everything and think carefully about how to proceed. And the main reason for this is that we know keeping a flame going requires intentional action. So if you are somebody who thinks, well, I love this person and I'm attracted to them and therefore we're always going to have a good sex life, you're probably wrong. That actually a good sex life requires intentional action.
Yes. Just
like, if you're really fit in your 20s and you enjoy exercise, you're not going to keep that by not doing anything about it. You have to nurture it by working out, going to the gym, doing whatever you do to feel good about yourself and stay fit. So conscientiousness helps people do that. So one of the things that people can do to nurture the flame is think, is a good sex life important to us? Do we think it's important? And it often is important in relationship satisfaction. What do we want to do to nurture it? We have this much time a week or a month. Do we want to put aside some of this time to say, let's intentionally create a situation where we have emotional and physical intimacy, because we know that the flame comes out of that.
Yes.
The flame is nurtured by doing that. What happens if you don't create that intentional action is that, number one, there's nothing to fan the flame. Number two, you might find yourself on a trajectory for your sex life that's deeply unfavorable. And years or decades later think, how did we end up here?
Yep. Which seems like that's the route that so many couples go in.
So many. Yeah. And it's partly because of this myth that desire is a drive that we all feel, like hunger or thirst, and we should just feel the spontaneous desire. It's completely not backed up by sex science. The concept of desire as a drive, the flame as eternal and everlasting, it's not backed up at all. So if you're choosing a relationship structure like monogamy, there's nothing wrong with monogamy. If you're choosing that structure, you're essentially choosing predictability in sexual partner. They're going to remain the same. And so you have to do something to keep that sex good, interesting, room for growth, diverse, unpredictable, and nurture it. So conscientiousness is a funny one.
Yes. Yeah. But makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense. But the antithesis of what you would think You think the conscientious one is maybe not the cool, bad one.
It doesn't sound so sexy.
It doesn't sound sexy.
But it is, because it's the couple, this is when sex researchers look at what makes a good sex life last the distance of time and what makes desire last the distance of time. These two things come up all the time. Being able to talk about sex and putting intentional nurturing into your sex life. These are the two things that maintain desire over time with the same person.
Is this where the self-expansion
Yes, that was going to be my next one. So
Okay.
This is the other strange thing. We know that when couples do something that is novel or fun or interesting together, that pushes their comfort levels or boundaries a little bit. So I'm not talking about sex here. I'm talking about things like, I don't know, instead of watching maths, I'm going to use maths every time. We're gonna sit at home and we're going to draw a portrait of each other and we're going to have fun doing it. Or we're going to plan a road trip across the UK, or we're going to go and watch a show that we've never seen before, or we're going to do something. We're going to go rock climbing.
Yes.
Something that neither person is comfortable or familiar with. It's no good if one of you's an artist and the other one's not. That's not fun. Okay, it's got to be something that pushes you both out of your comfort zone. This is called self-expansion activities, and this came out of some research in the US and Canada with some sex researchers that realized that what happened in relationships was this added to the quality of relationships, and they wondered what would it do for sex. And they actually found that people that spent time on self-expansion activities in their spare time with their partner were more likely to have sex and more likely to maintain desire than people that didn't. If you're time poor, then self-expansion activities are even more potent. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. So one of the things I write about in the latest book is how people can structure their month if they're time poor and they want to think about what can we practically do to have a better sex life. We're talking about a couple of minutes a month of increasing sexual currency. We're talking about maybe one night a month of prioritizing emotional and physical intimacy. That's the bath, the massage, being in bed together, talking about your day that might trigger desire. And we're talking about maybe one night a month of turning off the TV and self-expansion activities. You don't need a babysitter. You can do stuff at home. It's not masses of time to set your sex life on the course that you want it to be on, even if all you're doing is getting through the challenging period of your life, busyness, stress, parenthood, whatever it is. It doesn't take much time. But for a lot of people, they make the mistake of thinking, well, I'm spending loads of time with my partner because we sit and watch Netflix together every night. But you're not really.
But you're not.
You're parallel. You're doing parallel activities.
Not communicating. No, this all makes sense. And to me, it also suggests that by doing all of these things, that our sex life can actually become stronger over time, which is counter to the myth, is that it plateaus and falls off.
Absolutely. I'm glad you raised that because, I talk a lot about sexual challenges and sexual problems, but it's absolutely possible to have a sex life with the same person if you're choosing to be monogamous, and that is the challenging scenario, same person for years and years. So if we go with that example, it's possible to have a great sex life that lasts the distance of time, that allows both of you to grow, change, develop, accounts for changes to your body, changes to your sexuality, changes to your sexual interests, and becomes more and more satisfactory the longer you do it.
Right.
It's absolutely possible, but it doesn't happen without intentional action. It doesn't happen by not paying attention to it.
Yes. So then what happens if you're with a partner who decides they're not going to put forth any intention?
Yeah.
No self-expansion. There's no sexual currency in the relationship. You've had the conversation over and over again, and they say, well, this is the way that it is.
Yeah.
Is not having sex grounds to leave a relationship?
So this does happen, and it happens quite a lot for people, and I get a lot of messages on Instagram. Obviously can't read them all, but I get lots of that I see where people say, I have read your books, I understand this, I want to put it into action, and my partner is not interested. And it is heartbreaking for people because you know, sex is something that happens often between us and another person and other people. We can't do all the change alone. It just doesn't work like that. It requires everyone that's involved to be involved in the solution. At that point, people have to make a call, you know, is there anything else they can try is the first thing. And I would say a conversation where you say, this is what I want. This is what impact I think it would have on me and on you and on us. So you're giving the rationale why it's important. This is what I worry will be the consequences if we don't do this. Over to you. You know, you have to really set the case of this is why it matters for people to really hear that. But sometimes people still can't hear that. And they still don't have an interest in joining you on that journey. And then people have a choice to make. How important is sex to me? How important is sexual satisfaction? It is absolutely grounds for leaving a relationship. And sometimes the work that I do is permission giving for people to say, it's okay. Like, you only live once. And we talked at the very beginning about how for some people sex is really important. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel alive. It's life affirming. Is it okay for them to go their whole lives without that part of themselves being actualized? For other people, where it matters less, perhaps they make the call that everything else is good enough, that they're going to just stay, even though their sex life is lacking. So it's a very individual call, but I think it is important to give permission to say to people, it usually does matter. It isn't just a frivolous recreational pursuit that has no meaning. It's about our psychology, it's about our identity, it's about how we feel in relationships, it's about feeling alive. So why not have that for yourself? For some people, they have what we call destiny beliefs. So the idea that there is a soulmate and you shouldn't have to work at it. And this person will be your everything. And if something goes wrong, it can be disastrous to those people. And it can be really difficult for them to be open to the idea of doing the work, because they kind of feel like, well, I shouldn't have to do the work, because if you were my soulmate, we wouldn't need to do the work. And the other group of people, if we split them into two, the other concept is growth beliefs. So this is ideas that people can work at something and can get better at something together or can become more aligned. And obviously people might have a mixture of these two, or they may go through different phases of their life and feel different things. But sometimes the dilemma that you're talking about is because one person is team growth and the other is team destiny. And the person with the growth beliefs is saying, look, we can change this. We can do something about it. And the other person is like, we shouldn't have to work at it. And we shouldn't have to try. Sometimes the way in there is for the person with the growth beliefs to hold the optimism and say, look, I know that this isn't something that you feel super optimistic about because you see it this way, but why don't we just experiment? It may be that the person who's unhappy about their sex life needs to be explicit about what the consequences might be. And by that, I don't mean a threat. I mean, I don't want a relationship that is this way. And so for me, if we don't make this change, it won't be enough. And I would really like you to join me in that. But also, I'm wanting to let you know that this won't work for me long term. Because I think sometimes we can get distracted into an idea that just because we are, you know, married or have kids or have a mortgage or live together or are monogamous or whatever it is, been together 5 years, whatever, that means that that person is just ours.
Right.
And that we don't really have to meet their needs. And actually that's a myth. Again, just thinking about Esther Perel, one of my favourite quotes of hers is that she says, we never own our partners. They're just on loan with a chance to renew.
Yes.
And I really like that idea because we all should feel as though how we're working in a relationship, whether that's about sex or the wider part of the relationship, we should feel as though we are working to make that a good place to be for the person we're in it with. And if we stop working and we do what I call giving each other the scraps, give our best version of ourselves to other people, stop prioritizing the things that are important to our partners, then we're going to be in trouble.
And I think what also happens so often to parents is you end up saying, okay, I'm going to give my best, not to myself, not to my partner, but to my to my children.
Yeah.
And then I think that empowers your children to then ruin your sex life.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's some fascinating research actually that I came across when I was writing that book around what sexual satisfaction does to a parental unit, and the idea that when we're feeling sexually satisfied, we actually operate better as a team, which then makes parenting easier, ironically, because obviously kids sometimes are the thing that gets in the way of people's sex life in the first place. The other thing is that when we're sexually satisfied, it actually provides us almost with this like relationship, I don't know, overdraft.
Okay.
That allows us to borrow from it when times are tough.
I once said, and this got me in a ton of trouble, I was on Lorraine, and I said that, my wife and I, we prioritize ourselves over our children, in essence, to create a stronger foundation so that we could be better parents. And what you're saying from a sexual standpoint also endorses that.
Yes.
Is that the stronger we are as a unit sexually, the better parents we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, at different stages of parenthood, that will be more or less possible. Obviously, we're not advocating in the newborn days or the first year, people need to put their sex life above all else. Of course, it will take a back seat. But parenthood's a long road, as we both know. And at some point, sexual dissatisfaction, if it starts to creep in, can make parenthood harder.
Yes.
And that can make the emotional climate of the whole family difficult.
We're almost at the end here, and there's one. There's 50 things that I like to say, but two things in particular that I must say is that, so we had a conversation a few months ago, and something from that conversation I've taken, and I truly believe it's helped to change my children. I sat my 13-year-old and my 10-year-old down, and I said, we are going to look at anatomy.
Great.
We're going to look at male anatomy. We're going to look at female anatomy.
Great.
And at 10, my son Liam, that's right, I'm calling him out. He can tell you where a clitoris is.
Good for
him.
He
can tell you the difference between a vagina and a vulva.
Good. This is so important.
And why is it so important?
Well, it's important for so many reasons. So it's important for young people's sense of agency over their own bodies. Unfortunately, there are very high rates of childhood sexual abuse, right? It's a very sad part of our society. One of the things that maintains that is children not having the words or feeling shame about that part of their body, so not being able to communicate it. So at a young age, it's really important for that reason. It's also important to understand pleasure-giving parts of anatomy, because you and I talked about the orgasm gap earlier. How can you even begin to address the orgasm gap if you don't know that the clitoris exists? And a lot of the people that I work with, people of all genders, don't know that the clitoris exists, even if they've got one. They've never heard about it. So how are we supposed to know?
There are people on the planet that don't know a clitoris exists.
Absolutely.
Really? I can understand that they don't know where it is.
No,
but
they don't
even
know
that
it exists. Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
Okay.
The third thing is that sex is, in essence, communication and negotiation with someone else, whether that's verbal or non-verbal. That's what it is. How can we, as we move into our sexual debut, communicate about sex if we can't say the words out loud? Because the message we got from our family was, these words are off limits.
Right.
So not only do you feel like they're bad words that you shouldn't say, but also you've not ever practiced having those words in your mouth. I know it sounds like a silly thing, but if you've never said clitoris, then the first time you say clitoris, it feels weird. And so what we need to do is normalize those words, because a clitoris is no different to an elbow. If we can talk about elbows, we should be able to talk about clitorises. If the only word you've had as a young person for your vulva is front bottom, which is a very common word in the UK, bizarre, how are you then supposed to use that word in a sexual encounter? It's not an appropriate word, is it, with a sexual partner? But you've got no other word, because no one's ever given you another word, and the other words feel strange for you. So talking about sex is already hard, but we're really disadvantaging young people if we don't educate them and normalize talking about sex from a young age. Super important.
Right.
I'm glad you're doing it.
And and it was only because of that conversation, and I greatly appreciate it.
That's great.
I don't think they appreciated it initially.
They will. They absolutely will.
What are you doing? But even as an adult, a shockingly large percentage of women who couldn't distinguish the difference between a vulva and a vagina.
Yeah, I think the stats I have to hand in my mind coming up just now from the Eve Appeal, which is a great gynecological charity, is something like 44% of women can't identify the different parts of their vulval anatomy. It's a large number of people.
All right, we're going to go way left.
Okay.
But you've said maths a few times. You said good old Married at First Sight UK.
Maths.
There was perhaps one of the most talked about scenes or talked about moments of Married at First Sight UK that happened, that I see happens quite a bit. And that is when you have someone who is not sexually attracted to someone.
Yes.
And believes that by having sex, that will increase their sexual attraction.
Yes.
Is that true or false?
Oh, that's a good one, this. Okay, so physical attraction is pretty important to sexual response. So we would say that physical attraction is a bit of a prerequisite to being able to enjoy a sexual experience. However, it kind of depends, doesn't it, what your motivation is for going into that sexual experience. You know, we all have sex for different reasons. You know, we know there are 237 documented reasons why humans have sex. Attraction is usually something that you would say would need to be part of a sexual encounter, but I can think of plenty of people that have sex where they're not attracted to the person they have sex with, and they're doing it for another reason. It's meeting another motivation. It might be difficult though, you know, for the person having sex with you to hear that, and you know, that's absolutely the case. I've not seen this episode yet. I'm behind.
Oh well, yeah.
I've been out of the country a lot, and I'm behind on my maths.
This is a big moment.
Yeah,
and it's hotly debated.
I feel like I wish I had more context to give to my answer. I'm giving you the scientific version.
All right, so
I'm going to watch it and call you.
I find this to be such a major thing, especially on a lot of these shows that I'm on.
And what's your perspective on it?
I quite honestly, I don't see it changing. I don't see it changing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no mechanism that it would.
No, not at all. A matter of fact, I think that there's a higher likelihood that you create more distance with that particular person. Yeah. For a variety of reasons. But you're definitely not losing yourself, you know, in essence, in that experience. You're probably, you know, a lot of that is a cisgendered heterosexual relationship. The man normally walks away with an orgasm, so he's thinking, okay, I'm fine. The woman walks away disgruntled, disheartened, feeling used. And so for me, I just don't like it.
No, and it also connects with what we were saying earlier about this idea of sex being like a water slide, that you have to kind of get on and you can only get off at the pool at the bottom.
But we have this societal script running.
We do.
Because you have these other contributors saying, just have sex, just figure it out, just have sex, just shag him, just shag. And you're thinking, but what is that going to do? Yeah,
there's a lot of pressure for people to move to sex more quickly than they would like. And that comes up a lot in the work that I do, where people say, I just wish that I could take it a bit slower, but there's a cultural expectation that I need to move to sex quicker than I actually feel ready to.
The question is always, well, have you kissed? Have you had sex?
Yes.
Has the person said, I love you? These are the markers. And also what I find interesting is that 20 years ago, the marker was, have you kissed? Have you said, I love you? Have you had sex?
Interesting.
Today it's, have you kissed?
Yes.
And I believe it's changing to, have you had sex? Have you kissed? Because a larger number of people that I'm talking to would much rather have casual sex than kissing. So to many people, casual sex is less intimate than a kiss.
And also, no one defines what they mean by sex either, do they? They say, have you had sex? But
that's true.
No one's saying, well, we had oral sex, or we made each other come with that. No one's saying that either. So there's this idea that it's only real sex. That what's implicit in that is that it's penetrative sex.
Yes.
I think that's what's implicit in that.
Yeah, fair. All right, last one, or we'll be kicked out.
Okay.
You've had many conversations.
I have.
Through life. Incredible. especially I would imagine in your practice. When you think of the most memorable conversation, who was it with? What did you talk about? And most importantly, what did you walk away? What did you learn from that conversation?
Oh, I can think of so many. I'm actually going to pick, people don't often think this about therapists, but actually we learn a lot from our clients and we're emotionally moved a lot by our clients. I've had some very impactful conversations with clients of mine who've talked about the absolute joy and life-affirming nature of their sex life into old age. The thing that we don't often talk about as a society, which is older people's sexuality being something which they hold dear, which is expansive, which is about growth, which is about spending your retirement pushing the boundaries of your sexuality. They really challenge that thing that, I know to be true from research, but you wouldn't think it from society. Sex is not a young person's endeavor or a start of the relationship endeavor when everything's new and, life was easy. Actually, there is real beauty and real growth that is available to people that want to go there, and that's lifelong. And that's a huge privilege and changes the way I practice, because then when I get couples who are like, well, we're this age now and I suppose we should expect it to take a back seat, it could be easy to go, yeah, that's true, you've been together a long time, you've got busy lives, but actually, no. Why should you accept that?
Yes.
So I'm going to go with that one.
I love that one, because for all of us, right, because we're all aging, it gives inspiration, it gives hope, it gives aspiration, and I will say, kind of in ending here, what I think I appreciate most about your work is that you're helping to change this script. Because I know we talk about sexual script, but there's a script that I feel like as a society, especially in the West, that we just follow.
We do.
And Karen's like, no, actually, let's rip that script up.
Rip it up. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and you do a great job at that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's it for my episode with Dr. Karen Gurney. And can I tell you how much I loved what she said and how much I'm going to apply to my life. And let me give you my top takeaways. The first is forget the myth of being good in bed. Sex isn't a skill that you master. It's a shared experience that requires openness, communication, and vulnerability. What makes a great sexual connection isn't expertise, but the willingness to listen, talk, and grow together. Real intimacy develops simply from mutual understanding and the freedom to explore. The next is faking orgasms creates a false reality for both partners. Do not fake orgasms. When one person pretends, it maintains the illusion that the other is satisfying them, which can mask the true needs of both partners. Over time, this erodes desire and satisfaction, as genuine pleasure is replaced with performance. Honesty in intimacy builds stronger and more satisfying connections. The third is that sex isn't just about reaching orgasm. It's about the freedom to let go with one another. While orgasms are pleasurable, good sex goes deeper. It's about connection, presence, and shared enjoyment. When we focus less on the end goal and more on each other, intimacy becomes richer and more satisfying. And last but not least, is bad sex often happens when one feels obligated or disconnected, leaving them feeling absent from the experience. So rather than enduring encounters that don't feel right, it's important to recognize and voice your own needs. This honesty leads to a deeper sense of agency and better, more fulfilling experiences moving forward. When it comes to love, we're all on our own journey. And that means any advice we're given should be tailored to our love goals, not someone else's. This is where my show and Tinder, who sponsor this podcast, have teamed up to help you. Each week on We Need to Talk, I'll explore love and relationships through a different lens, so you can get the advice that relates to your romantic situation. Tinder is for all types of relationships, and I truly believe it has the best tools to help you form the connections you're looking for. That might be long-term commitment or short-term experiences. Maybe it's friendship. But regardless of which part of the journey you're on, Tinder and I are here to support you. Their app is full of possibilities, and it's designed to help you explore every kind of connection. It starts with a swipe, so download Tinder today.